So this first session is just going to be kind of focusing on birth to 12 months for sensory motor development. So we're occupational therapists. We look at how the sensory systems impact motor development. So we're kind of focusing on gross motor and fine motor development. So we'll start with the theory and then kind of general outline, and then we'll go into more detail with each slide.
So sensory integration being the foundation from Dr. Jean Ayres, developed in the theory in the 1960s. Her idea is basically that sensory integration is a neurological process that organizes sensation from one's own body and from the environment and makes it possible to use the body effectively within the environment. So what we take in through the environment gets processed in our bodies, in our brain, and what we put out is this constant feedback loop that just, is in constant communication with each other.
And so the next slide just shows, I think everybody's, well, I don't know if everybody's familiar, but Maslow in psychology had started the hierarchy of needs, and that little pyramid kind of, you need the things on the bottom in order to achieve. And for him, he was talking about self-actualization. For us, Taylor and Trott had built on Jean Ayres' theory of sensory processing and kind of explaining it in this pyramid of needing that foundational stuff in order to achieve academic learning at the top here. So, we're starting at the bottom of the central nervous system, which we're going to go into all of these systems, but you basically need within your own body the right cues from your vestibular system and the proprioceptive system and your tactile system. That's kind of the foundation to sensory processing, just being organized from within your own body. And then once you are more organized from within your own body, then you can access the rest of the world in a more typical and fluid way. So we'll go into what those systems are and then how it pertains to the little guys from 0 to 12 months.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about the vestibular system. It is the system that gives us, it contains the fluid of the inner ear. It guides our movement when our eyes are closed. It provides us information about upright posture, equilibrium, balance responses relative to gravity. And when stimulated, it tends to increase alertness. Some examples of vestibular input include swinging, rolling, spinning, running, jumping, riding on a roller coaster, anything that really kind of stimulates that inner ear in different positions and that fluid moving is part of that vestibular system.
It's also a very powerful system. It is the system that makes you car sick. So when you're in a car, and what happens is that fluid in the inner ear is relatively stationary, but your visual system is giving your brain cues that you're moving. So that discrepancy between visual and vestibular, it really impacts your body from kind of within, getting the right cues, brain and body connection wise. And so this is a foundational system that we make sure every kid that comes into our clinic that we know how their vestibular system is functioning for them, because it's very powerful. And again, it's kind of the main system for body awareness in space and understanding where your body is relative to other things in your environment.
And then the next quick question. Yeah. So my niece, she cries every time we put her in a car, and I was wondering if it was related to car seat, but it doesn't seem like it. She just cries. Like as soon as we put her in the car, she cries. So maybe there's a problem with her vestibular system.
Yes, most likely. Most likely that. But does she, how old is she?
She is now 1.5.
1.5. Okay. And she's still crying as soon as you put her in the car?
Yeah.
Does she, does it get better as the car moves, or screams the whole time?
Screams the whole time.
Yeah. So there's probably something going on with her vestibular and not feeling kind of comfort. So you're putting her in this new position, right? And it's unknown, and she's not getting the right cues from her own body. So she is then going into that fight or flight mode and thinking she's unsafe. So that's kind of how that vestibular is probably impacting her. Mm-hmm. So I suggest like the more you can swing her at the park, the more movement you can get, the more rolling, that will help tap into that vestibular system and build that system, that brain body connection with the vestibular better.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah. So then the next system is the other main foundational system that we work with. So we just have in our joints, we have receptors called proprioceptors. So any input to the muscles and joints is proprioceptive input. This tends to be very grounding and calming. So like for adults, I always equate it to getting a massage. Or lifting weights. So like a lot of grown-ups have to like lift weights to regulate their bodies. Or like everybody likes different types of input for massage. You know, maybe you like it stronger, maybe you like it lighter, but it is very grounding and calming. And it gives you feedback to your muscles and joints about where you are relative to other things. So when you look at, you know, kids and preschool age kids, a lot of times they're walking along the wall, like as a cue, like they're leaning and walking because they need that proprioceptive input to give them that cue about where their body is in space. Or at circle time, maybe they're leaning on a friend or leaning on the back of the, you know, chair or something, because they can't really sit and process from their own body where they are in space. So they need that extra feedback to this proprioceptive system to give them a cue. And so this tends to be very calming and organizing, and almost every kid will seek out proprioceptive input, which is great. You want them to seek what they need, but sometimes kids need extra and more. So providing that is very helpful as well. And it tends to be more calming, whereas the vestibular tends to be more alerting and kind of like wake you up, like after a roller coaster. But some examples, like again, I like to equate it for like adults, like what you tend to do to regulate, like go for a run, for example. You're getting tons of proprioceptive input to the muscles and joints about like each time you step, you know, you're getting feedback to those joints and muscles, but at the same time you're moving. So vestibular wise, you're getting input to that system as well. So a lot of times in our sessions, we couple the vestibular with proprioceptive input to help these two systems really integrate better and give the right cues to the brain body about where you are in space.
Nice.
So the next system is the tactile system, which is our light touch, our deep pressure, our stretch, and or vibration. So it's when we touch something, that information from our fingertips gives us that information to our brain. And often the system is coupled with the proprioceptive system. So again, like going back to what Maya was mentioning about some of the kids that walk along the walls to get body space awareness, they need that physical touch of something. They might be dragging their fingertips along the wall just so that they're like, okay, my body is here and the wall is here. So actually getting some tactile input from the environment to let them know where they are in space. As far as what we see sometimes with certain kids in their sensitivities tactile wise, kids might be hypersensitive, and we want to be careful using that word hypersensitive or hyposensitive, meaning, hyper being high and then hypo being low, but just having some sensitivity around tags in the clothing, being able to touch certain textures, not wanting to step on grass or sand or something unexpected. An unexpected touch from others can sometimes be super alarming for a child if they're not ready for that touch. We also see that with sensitivity in terms of eating, ability to tolerate certain textures, or will only prefer a certain cup, a certain nipple, a certain something, because that's the one that they're most comfortable with, and they can adapt to something that might be a little bit different. So it lets us know that that tactile system may not be processing in the most efficient way.
So those are kind of the foundational sensory systems. And so then we'll talk a little bit about sensory modulation, because this is a lot of times, we get referrals for kids with emotional things, and the families think it's just behavior. But a lot of times there's sensory reasons why they might not be regulated kind of within their own body. So sensory modulation is the ability of the central nervous system to regulate its own activity. So this is just, your alertness levels, like how, for grownups, again, you wake up in the morning, you maybe need a cup of coffee to kind of get you more alert, right? And then, you'll have lunch, and then after lunch, there's a little dip. And so you might need a little bit of candy or something, or another second cup of coffee to help give you a second boost throughout your day, to help keep you regulated, right? So we use kind of external reinforcers, but that's kind of with an intact sensory system. We use those. So with our kids, sometimes it's, if their systems are not doing their job, then we see all of these cues. So, a lot of times people will describe like a colicky baby, like, oh, they just can't, they're always upset. And, I mean, it's normal for babies to be upset for certain things, food, tired, uncomfortable, and us understanding these. But when they're they describe them as colicky sometimes, it may be related to this inability of their own sensory system to not regulate itself. So it's just something for everybody to be aware of, that if you're not getting the right enough movement for babies, or enough, input, sensory movement input, this can affect their ability to adapt, adjust, and regulate kind of within their own body and within their environment, and across different environments as well.
And the way to tell that sometimes too is just if you've met their basic needs, if you've changed them, you've fed them, you've hugged them, you've done everything you can, and they're just not able to calm for a long period of time, then this is something that we might just want to be more aware
of. Okay, so now we'll kind of go over the developmental milestones and how they relate to sensory.
So in utero, our vestibular system starts developing. Babies are suspended in the amniotic fluid, and they're learning body and space in that fluid. So as mom is moving through space, the babies are also moving through space. So that system is being developed very, very early on. In the natural birth versus the C-section, through the natural birth, babies get their first burst of intense proprioceptive input to their whole bodies coming out of the birth canal. Through a C-section, babies are not receiving this intense proprioceptive input. They're not physically moving through a smaller channel to get this really good input. So that's something to be aware of. That's something that we're aware of when we interview families and we interview moms, that, what was that birth like? And just knowing that the babies did not get that big burst of proprioceptive input, they may need a little more sensory input just to help their bodies get a little bit more regulated, help them get a little bit more sensory input so that they're a little more regulated. So these babies might need more. Right. I think it's just the message about that comment there.
Yeah. And so then we'll touch on some of basically, newborn babies, it's very easy that what they do. They feed, they sleep, and they poop. So you just kind of want to make sure that these systems are regulated, right? And kind of routine. You want to establish a routine. A lot of times we're going to just touch on feeding. It's not necessarily an OT specific area. Sometimes there are some OTs that do specialize in feeding, but for us in the general kind of sensory, it's just, are they forming a latch? Are there reasons why they can't, are there sensory reasons why, and again, it would go back to that, getting them enough input and movement so that they're aware of their body, they're aware, but this is, again, a reflex, so it should come naturally. And if it doesn't, that's also kind of a sign, like, okay, maybe you need to boost something, and talking to lactation, there's other people to talk to, but being aware of these things is really important, I think, at an early age, as the parent, just being able to be aware of these things and tease out what might be happening for them. Sleep wise, we do see a lot of sometimes older kids that never really got into a good sleep routine. So sleep training is very important. That's kind of how you are regulated, right? If you don't get enough sleep, you're going to be a hot mess the next day, so making sure that the babies are getting a good routine. And again, it's different for every single family. So you do what works for your family, but knowing that, like, getting a routine and trying to keep the biorhythms in a regulated way helps, again, with that regulation. The ability for that central nervous system to regulate comes with sometimes external reinforcers. So us as parents have to help our babies become more regulated, from externally. And then, just some of the experts in speech therapy, we're kind of touching on some of the other things, but speech therapy wise, they really recommend no screen time from age 0 to 2. And that's mainly for communication and social interaction, because, and also sometimes, okay, you don't let the baby be on the screen. However, a lot of times parents are on their screen. And of course, if a mom's feeding and she's bored, she's going to look at her phone. That's going to happen. That's fine. However, just being aware of how much screen time you're on, my brother just had a baby and he was on his phone or iPad almost all of the baby's waking hours. And I was like, you're modeling this behavior for your baby. It's not okay. So just being aware of these things, like, you want, when the baby's awake and alert, you want to be interacting with them as much as you possibly can. And then tummy time. Tummy time is super, super important from day one. You know, initially you might be starting tummy time on the chest. We'll go into more detail of like why it's so important, but just knowing, you know, getting that baby on the belly, trying to lift their head up against gravity, it starts all of the development of the spinal musculature to help support neck, back, spinal, core strength, everything. So tummy time is really, really important for our babies early on.
Okay, so we'll get into a little more specifics now with developmental milestones and sensory processing. So from 0 to 3 months, again, you know, touching upon what Maya mentioned earlier about establishing the routines as best as we can. Being on that tummy gives you not just proprioceptive input, but tummy on skin-to-skin contact is tactile. Swinging, moving with your baby is the best way to start giving, you know, all of that really good sensory input, you know, vestibular, proprioceptive, and tactile, all of those things all wrapped in one. The best thing you can do in those early ages, in that, you know, early time frame of 0 to 3 months is, you know, the holding, the contact. In the 3 to 4 months, you might start to see, you know, more prone, being able to lift your head up a little bit, starting to roll. Beginning transitional movements against gravity is really important. So just, you know, even being on your belly, on the floor, on the mat, and just, you know, having that baby start lifting up their heads is huge in terms of building that spinal musculature and that beginning of body through space on their own. That 4 to 6 months period, sleep training starts beginning, starting to eat solid foods, bilateral hand skills start coming in, the ability to hold the bottle closer to about the end of that time frame, and the reaching for toys. So if you have that really good body in space and you know where you are, then reaching out to try to grab something becomes something that is a developmental milestone, but it's something that, you know, those postural positions start setting up that framework and that foundation for the use of the hands. 6 to 8 months, ocular motor skills, being able to sit up, protective responses. Babies are starting to learn their balance. You're propping them up, they're falling over. They're starting to get that, you know, where am I in the midline? And can I get myself back to where I'm supposed to go? And in terms of, you know, hand skills, we're starting to hold 2 things in 2 hands and really bring them into midline. So these are all important little milestones that kind of happen around this age.
Mm-hmm. And so continuing on with the 6 to 8 month time period, you really want to be aware of the transitional movements, right? So at 6 months, the children should be sitting independently, a little wobbly for sure, but should be able to sit for long periods of time. And can they transition in and out of that position? So from lying down, can they push up to sitting? From sitting, can they safely transition down to lying down, or is it still toppling over? So kind of developing those protective responses with the hands, like if they're toppling over, do they start to reach out? Sitting unsupported, and then, you know, for the fine motor, you're looking at like a pincer grasp for when they're self-feeding with the Cheerios and things like that between the 6 to 8 month mark. But the key is transitional movements and making sure that they're starting to move on their own against gravity. Again, they're getting that vestibular, proprioceptive, and tactile constantly. You know, there's all these contraptions now, but like really the best thing is having the baby on the floor on a blanket, you know, and pushing and moving around. From 8 to 10 months, they should start to be able to crawl in quad, that's on all fours. And again, tummy time is the development of all those muscles that you need for that. Starting to pull to stand, you know, with support, and they should be feeding themselves pretty independently. I mean, messily, but feeding themselves. So, and then 10 to 12 months, you know, you're pre-walking, you're babbling, more adaptive and protective responses against gravity. So kind of just getting your balance, right? Like if you're starting to lose it, aware that you're falling. You know, kids are going to fall at this age, and it's okay for them to fall, because that's how you learn. You know, a lot of our parents don't want their kids to fall, but it's really important, because when you do hit, bam, that's proprioceptive input. You know where you are relative to the ground. And a lot of times, you know, kids, when they start climbing, maybe a little bit older than 12 months, but they'll start to climb, and they go up to a certain level, and they should be able to get down. You know, a lot of times kids won't climb up high enough because they know they're not safe to get back down. So that's kind of how that body awareness piece plays into all of just child development. But yeah, being able to kind of start to be aware of when you're falling, try to catch your balance, probably not at the 10 to 12 month age. But it is important for them to fall safely, you know, within boundaries, but knowing where their body is in space, starting to know that. Fine motor wise, they should be pointing and clapping and waving. These are things fine motor wise they should be able to do with their hands. So that's kind of developmental milestones. Now we'll kind of go into application. So like, how do you get your baby to do some of these things that we're talking about, and how to help with that, those developmental milestones?
So, you know, as a infant, swaddling is, I can't emphasize how important swaddling is in the early stages, because that swaddling gives you that tactile and proprioceptive input to help organize the system early on. It just is a great way to provide that organized input, and it helps them fall asleep. I often hear from parents that, you know, tell me that their kids never really like that swaddling. And, you know, if I remember back, you know, my kids, both of them, actually, I swaddled them up until they were about 10 months when they slept. And, you know, even just getting them under the arms once they get active with those arms, but giving them that really tight input really helps to set a foundation for organizing their sensory system in a passive way on our part. It's great for the babies, but it's just a great way to get that in there. So I can't emphasize that enough. Even if your baby doesn't like it, you know, get them in there, get them wrapped up, and get them organized, especially when they're sleeping. And it I think it helps with sleep. It helps to keep them more organized for a longer period of time. You know, when your baby's not swaddled, you know, that startle reflex kicks in and they wake themselves up. So, you know, get your baby swaddled, get them organized. Providing varied positions of movement. So hold your baby prone, you know, like this, and belly. On the belly, down on the belly, swing them through space, hold them like a football, holding while bouncing on a ball or on a rocking chair, or just rocking and moving with your baby, or swinging with your baby in the arms, all help with vestibular input. In some countries, you know, that just don't have gadgets, they will put the baby on their chest, wrap them up in a, you know, in just a piece of fabric, and go about their day. Those babies are getting so much vestibular input as they're moving, you know, with their moms through their normal activities. And it's just a great way to get all that vestibular input in there. We are back on that tummy time. So important for development of core and spinal musculature, as we mentioned before. It provides the foundation for body awareness and feeling secure in your own body. And it's all sort of pulled together at that core. A lot happens at that tummy. When you're down in that tummy time position, you know, it just lays that foundation for strength, for proximal control. So starting by lifting up the head, then being able to push up on those arms, then being able to get that belly up and lifted. And it sets that precursor for crawling. I think Maya's going to touch upon that on the next slide, but it just is such a huge part of development that really cannot be skipped. And yes, babies do not like tummy time. In the old days, babies used to lay on their stomachs to sleep, and now it's back to sleep, so they don't spend a lot of those hours, you know. So it's our due diligence to make sure that that tummy time happens. And, you know, as time progresses, babies will get stronger in that tummy time, and they'll start to enjoy it more. You know, get down there with them, read a book with them, down there, put the toys on the ground. You know, my babies loved having a mirror, and they just love to look at themselves. So that's a great way to encourage tummy time, and maybe do it in short bursts. Maybe just don't leave them on their tummy for like 20 minutes, but like 5 minutes here, then maybe 6 minutes the next time, and really start to build on that.
Yeah, I was just going to say, you know, a lot of times it starts with not even minutes, but maybe seconds, you know, like 10 seconds, and they're starting to scream and cry. Okay, so next time, you know, maybe in a half an hour from now, you try 15 seconds and really try to build, like, just baby steps, on how much time they spend on tummy time, but like kind of throughout, like my friends will always ask me like, how long? I'm like, constantly throughout the day, multiple times a day, and start to time how long they can tolerate it, and if it's only 30 seconds, then you do 30 seconds of it. And then you tell them like they're okay, they're crying because it's uncomfortable and they don't like it. It's hard for them, but it's also developmentally the best thing for them. So knowing that, you have to be in charge as the parent and push it maybe 35 seconds the next time, and do multiple, maybe 10 sets of 30 seconds a day. And that just, you'll start to see they'll build on it and build on it and build on it. So for rolling, which starts around 3 to 4 months, things you can do to help: get on their level, lay down with them. You can have them hold the finger and help them roll, help them feel the movement. Initially, like at the 3-month mark, if they're kind of like reaching for a toy, but like getting stuck in that right in the middle of the roll and then coming back down, just help them, give them a little boost, just manually, so they can feel it, right? And then go back, roll back the same way. Sometimes kids will tend to pick a side, have a preference of like only roll one way, so like rolling in a circle. Try to have them roll the other way as well. And again, you can manually just move them, use toys, use things that that they love, like a stuffy, or you have them reach for your face. Kids love pulling hair and grabbing faces, so having your face be the motivational tool to get them to roll and move. Fine motor wise, again, like Cindy was saying before, like with that tummy time, with that core musculature, then you have the foundation with all of that proprioceptive and vestibular tactile input. You have the foundation now to then start to reach, holding a rattle, shaking, toys that, there's sensory balls that have like holes in them that you can just grab onto. And it doesn't have to be really purposeful grabbing, right? You just are kind of reaching, and maybe they're using their reflexes to grab, but at least they're starting to reach for toys, at objects. You have those mobiles when they're on their back and they can hit, have them try to bat in prone, try to reach up. They won't yet, but at least they're looking at these objects and they're getting that position in prone and reaching. Visual motor wise, their eyes should be tracking. They should be able to turn their head toward a stimulus. If you're in front of them, like they should be able to see you. You should be able to see their eyes focusing on you, on your face, and moving and talking as you talk to them and as you interact with them. These are all kind of really important for that first 6 months to really interact. Again, no screen time, and really get that social face-to-face to help develop all of these skills.
So moving into that 6 to 8 month period, we should start to see some sitting supported and sitting independently. Ways that you can encourage that. You can put the baby, in the middle of, pillows. You can sit behind your baby and spot with your hands, or sit in front of your baby and have maybe a toy in front of you, or just interacting with them. But brief periods of having them sit unsupported is really going to help build those muscles in that midline upright position. You can also sit them on a bed or a couch, so that if they fall down, you can help find their balance against gravity in a soft supported setting. And, going into, being able to sit independently also strengthens your flexor muscles in the front, your abs and your back extensors, to help give you that upright posture. But it also gives you that strength to start then commando crawling in prone. So maybe just, being commando crawl is reciprocal crawling, one arm, opposite leg, in coordination, but with tummy on the ground. So moving in that commando crawling, maybe, to a toy or to a parent or to a sibling, is going to get that moving through space, but it's also going to start building that musculature then that they'll be able to lift up on all fours and then start to crawl. Some things that we start to see at the fine motor level is a pincer grasp, the beginning of self-feeding, like using, picking up little Cheerios, being able to efficiently hold your bottle, bringing toys to midline, starting with cause and effect toys. If I do this, then this will happen. So things that, push So if I do something, then something happens. So pushing something and a door pops up with a toy in it, or putting things in and out of a container, being able to stack rings. So we start to see definitely more fine motor skill happen in this area. But in order to do some of this fine motor stuff, you've got to have a stable core. So that's really going to be where that tummy time and the tummy time and that sitting and the building of those core muscles are really going to be important, because if you're not stable through here, it's really then harder to use your hands more efficiently and with refinement as we go along, as we develop, more skill.
And then the 8 to 10 month mark, so around like that 9 month, you should be starting to crawl on all fours. So you want that reciprocal commando crawl so that you get the reciprocal where you're like using right and left alternatingly, right? So a lot of times, again, kids will choose one side and maybe only scoot to one side, or only like if they're on their bottom and they're scooting with one leg and the other leg is kind of like limp next to them. Like these are things that you want to be aware of, and that's not typical movement patterns. So you want to make sure you get your baby more on their tummies when they're starting to butt scoot instead of crawling on all fours. That's telling us that they have weakness somewhere in their core, either flexors or extensors, that because they are not moving in a typical way that they should. So crawling on all fours, again, reciprocal movements are right and left, alternating movements. Ways you can get that, you can sometimes just kind of get right behind on kind of on top of the baby, like hand over hand, and your knees kind of behind each leg, and move their right arm forward while your left leg kind of scoots their left leg forward, and kind of hand over hand again, really making them feel how it feels to get the right movement patterns going. And again, as we've talked about before, tummy time really does provide this initial foundational strength in order to get into quad position. And encouraging crawling like with toys, with people, reaching out in front of them, and again, helping to facilitate with the hand over hand, or just demo, you can show them and see if they can model the behavior. Using a tunnel is sometimes helpful to get them to crawl through. Sometimes on softer surfaces like sand or grass, it's fun to see how they respond. And again, you also might be able to see if they have any tactile aversions, like we had talked about earlier, that if they don't want to touch the sand. Again, my niece was like this. She didn't want to touch grass, or say she started crying instantly. So I told my brother, get her in sand, get her on grass, because it's not typical to be scared of different surfaces. You should be comfortable enough with your body in space that just different textures of the ground should not make you cry. Here's one thing that we hear sometimes that, oh, my child never crawled. Do not skip crawling. It's a very important developmental milestone for those reciprocal and core movements, to establish good bilateral coordination. That's both sides of your body coordinating at the same time in reciprocal patterns. So we always ask, well, how did they skip crawling? Like how did they just jump up and start walking? It's like, oh no, the parents always say, oh, I put them in standing. So again, we go back to those transitional movements again. Really important for the kids to be able to transition against gravity on their own. So from lying to sitting, from sitting to pull to stand, to cruising, to then being able to let go of that, piece of furniture or walker and be able to walk independently. So the crawling part is really, really important to move against gravity, and to develop those natural movement patterns developmentally. So when we saw a lot of like 5 and 6 year olds, oh, they never crawled. Well, now they also cannot skip or do jumping jacks. Those are all bilateral coordination movements that developmentally just come naturally when you're ready to do them, if you have developed the right reciprocal movements of crawling and the bilateral coordination at an early age. Fine motor wise, stacking blocks, pegs into a board, kind of more refined, hand and muscle movements now, simple shape puzzles, and being able to turn pages of a book. Those are the kind of the fine motor milestones at this age.
So someone has a question, Maya. So if so they are saying that you shouldn't really force your child to move forward faster. They are
Right. No, that's a good point. Yes. So you don't want to like basically how development happens is the children do it when they're ready to do. However, we can boost them. We can give them a boost, right? So if so, for example, my niece was a late walker. She walked at I think almost 20 months. So I was with her every single week working on these movements with her. It came when she was ready, but I was helping to boost her, right? So being able to get her to cry. She would cry from time to time, and I'd push it, just like I said with the tummy time. When they cry, okay, have them cry for 10 seconds. Okay, maybe we can extend it 15 seconds next time. And then you want to just help build these foundational skills, right? Build the core, build the tummy time, build the crawling. But you can't make them, you're not going to be able to push them forward when they're not ready yet. So you won't be able to force them to walk when they can't walk. It's not going to happen. So yes, definitely you want to go developmentally you see what their speed is, knowing that these are the milestones, and if they're not reaching them, that's just okay. So we need to boost them. So I need to do more tummy time. Maybe it's not at the 3-month mark, but I'm doing more tummy time at the 6-month mark to then develop the right skill and musculature, so that by 8 months, then they're sitting independently by 8 months, or by 9 months, and then they're crawling by 10 to 12 months. So it's like, this is developmentally how the stages will go. And if your child is on a later trajectory, that's fine, but that's when we don't want those kids who skip crawling. Okay, you should be walking by now. So then you make them stand up and make them walk, but they skipped crawling. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
Did I answer the question? I don't know.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note that, there's a specific, time frame for some of these developmental things to happen, but each child is different, and each child comes with, their own story. So we don't know necessarily, what those challenges may be, if any. Some are on a later trajectory, some are on an earlier trajectory. So, our best bet is just to give, an idea of what we want to do to help boost that if it's not happening. And if we're not attaining those skills at that level, we certainly can't push a child to, do things at that level because they may not be there. So taking a step back and looking at, well, what are some of those foundational things that, that they're not necessarily that skilled at, and working on those might help to give a little bit of integration so that we can lay down the foundation for those developmental things to then come for that child at that time when they're ready.
Yeah. And again, these are, the milestones are their ranges for a reason, because everybody gets there at different levels. And knowing, like, if it's a later trajectory, that's fine. Kids get there, but we can always give them a little boost. I think the main thing as a new parent is, don't let your baby be in charge. Yes, your baby is going to tell you when they're upset, when things are hard, when they don't want to do something, or when they do want to do something. They'll let you know all of those things, but you also have to be the one to know, like, okay, they're crying when we go to the sandbox, like screaming bloody murder. This shouldn't be a screaming bloody murder situation. It should be fun and playing in the sand. So knowing that as the parent, that's when you have to kind of take charge. And a lot of parents are just good parents, like, oh, my baby's scared, I'm going to take them away. But then we give the message that, oh yeah, sand is scary. You should be scared of sand. Let me remove you from that, rather than, hey, it's okay. It's just a little bit of sand. We're going to play for a few minutes and then we can leave, and just kind of just being in charge in that kind of way. When you do see something that is maybe not typical, or maybe, you're like, oh, that's kind of weird. You kind of get a sense as a parent, like, oh, I loved sand when I was little, or I hated sand too, but like, oh, I don't want my baby to hate sand, so these are some of the things that as a new parent, you really want to just be aware of, and then make sure, developmentally, we're not impeding any of the development, and helping with the development rather than adding to the delays, if that makes sense.
And, not every baby has to like sand. Not every baby has to love being, in different textures. So, having said that, I think the key thing is, if your baby's having a huge reaction,
right.
completely very aversive to that, and just has a fit, then maybe that's letting us know that there are some sensitivities that we should look at, and that's more of what we want to do when we're encouraging kids to try different things is that, you know, if we get, there's a difference between just not liking it and or having a very huge reaction. So those are some things to, you know, kind of keep in mind. It's not a big, not every kid likes sand, not every kid likes slime, not every kid likes walking on the grass, bare feet. I don't. But it's just, but is there a huge reaction associated with that? And you know, if so, it's just something to keep in mind, you know, and then we're thinking, okay, what else do they not like that they're having a huge reaction on? And is there a trend? So those are the kind of, you know, red flags that we would just want to keep an eye out, yellow flags that we want to keep an eye out. It's not that every kid has to love sand or has to love slime or has to love something that we loved as kids, but it's more for, you know, just identifying, you know, hey, how can I support this? Because if they're not loving this and completely aversive to it, you know, what else might be happening there?
Thank you.
All right, so
okay, so heading into the 10 to 12 months, we're starting to see definitely more activity, pre-walking, pulling the stand. In terms of walking, encouraging your child to do so independently. So cruising along the furniture. You can also put toys on coffee tables. What I used to do is sort of connect, you know, a stool to an ottoman, to a coffee table, to the couch, and just line up a bunch of toys and just encourage, you know, my own child to sort of, you know, pull up to stand and, you know, get up there to interact with the toys. So that's really, that pull to stand is really going to get some of those leg muscles engaged, that core is going to be engaged, and everything's going to help pull together to get you up to that and build up the muscles to then lead to walking. You can also place your child in a tall kneel, which is basically kneeling on your knees. Like, so like as an adult, imagine yourself kind of kneeling, but your bottom not touching your ankles. So tall kneeling, playing in this position can encourage core development, muscle strength, and balance. So if they're not quite pulling to stand, you can maybe use a little step stool and, you know, tall kneel them up at that step stool and have their toys on that, you know, little step stool, just to vary the position and work on the muscles at the same time. Climbing and crawling across different surfaces helps to build more body and space. Uneven surfaces, you know, causes the kid to adapt and change as they're moving through. Crawling maybe over a pile of pillows, or maybe, you know, pushing all the pillows into pillows from the couch into a big giant mountain, and maybe having them, you know, climb up on that mountain or climb over the mountain, you know, helps to develop more refined patterns of movement through space.
And like climbing up the stairs. And then at this age, when they climb, you can have to encourage them to climb down, but have them go backwards down, not face first. So that, again, that's just getting more different planes of movement, different levels, and really establishing that those balanced reactions and adaptive responses to movement.
And for fine motor, they should be definitely doing more refined play skills, such as stacking blocks, connecting mega blocks or duplos, dropping and picking up toys purposefully, picking up and releasing things purposefully, and more advanced cause and effect toys. Using a hammer, the beginning of tool use, using a hammer to hit things, the balls coming down, turning, twisting toys. So this is where we really start to see more skill come in the hands.
So that's kind of it. The summary, you know, the key is, guys, the human body was meant to move. So making sure that our babies are moving against gravity, and really getting the right sensory movement experiences to develop the right motor skill milestones. And again, you know, you're not going to force them to crawl before they're ready to crawl, but getting them, establishing those foundational sensory experiences and movement, getting that proprioceptive, getting that vestibular, getting the tactile, and in addition, getting that tummy time, that core strength to start to develop at an early age is huge for kind of all of motor development. Experiencing movements against gravity is really important. You know, there are now with technology, there's all these great positioning tools to help. Like, so for example, if you've got a less than 6-month-old that's not sitting, but you need to cook dinner, putting them in that bumbo chair, sure, for short periods of time. Like there's things just to be aware of how long we're putting our kids in, in equipment that doesn't allow for movement. Because I think for me, again, I speak from experience for my niece, she was at a nursery where she was just in a contraction. She was happy as could be. She was so happy and cute and sweet and loving, but just not moving. And so that's why her motor skill development was delayed. She's 2 and 2 months now and looking great. But because she was really in these pieces of equipment for long periods of time, she didn't develop the right musculature at an early age. And so her milestones were a little bit later than they could have been. So, just being aware of that. And again, every family is different. You've got to do what you got to do sometimes as a parent. But just being aware of that and being aware of how much we're allowing our kids to move through space and getting the right sensory and movement experiences to develop properly.
That's actually a great comment, because a lot of parents have to put their kids in daycare. And so when you're looking for daycares, parents can observe the environment and what the existing kids there are doing in their care.
Yeah, that a good point you bring up too, Purva, is that the nursery that she was at, there were a lot more older toddlers than her. She was only one of 2 babies that was there. So making sure that it's the right age level for your child, so that if she was in a nursery with all babies, then they would all be moving at the same time, or, or at least take turns with the movement pieces, hopefully. But yeah, being aware of that for sure.
Great. Wow, this was really helpful. A lot of information, but really helpful information. So someone is asking, if they notice some issue with their child's motor skills development, do they talk to their pediatrician first or directly contact an expert like you?
I think they can do a combination of those things. I think pediatricians are a great place to start in terms of, they've already got a relationship with the pediatrician, and just say, hey, I'm concerned about the motor skills. And, pediatricians more and more these days are better at, helping to identify some of that, and are quicker to referring to occupational or physical or speech therapy, and just, realizing how important it is to get in there earlier than later. But we, on the flip side, we also, have a wait and see approach sometimes. And so I really encourage parents that, especially moms, you have a gut feeling. And if you have, even if it's your first baby and you're like, something's not quite, they're just not seeming like they're picking this up as quickly as some of the other kids that I see, in the moms group or at daycare, I would say that mom's gut feeling is the best, is the one to go on, even if your pediatrician says, hey, we can wait a little bit. But, as we've talked about in that 0 to 12 period, there's so much happening and so much foundation being laid for future skills to have happen. So, those transitional movements that we've talked about, if we're not making those transitional movements and we're not gaining that musculature, then, are we learning about our bodies in space? And then as, a toddler moving in the playground, do I know what to do? Can I plan out what I want to do? Those are all skills that really, lay on top of each other. So I would say, if you have any doubt, in that 0 to 12-month period, where you're just not feeling like, your baby's, where the other babies are, I would say that, the brains are so plastic from 0 to 3, and it's really the best time to get in there and get as much support as possible, because they're so plastic, they really pick up those skills quickly. That's why we wanted to have this talk and really wanted to start from 0, because it's, our population, we see a lot of kids from that 3 to 8 range, and that's, primarily, the bulk of what age we work with. But, when we interview some of these parents, to do our initial assessment, we find out that there are some of these things that happened in that 0 to 12 that really, for us are things that were like, whoa, we could have worked on those then, but you don't necessarily know. So, I would say that, going to your pediatrician is, a good start, but if they give you an answer that you're just gut wise not feeling is, is satisfying, definitely, reach out to an expert and, say, I'm having trouble with this. Is it appropriate?
Right.
And we'll definitely guide you in the right way.
Yeah. And the thing is, OTs, we don't do any diagnosing. So we really just look at, okay, sensory motor wise, gross motor wise, fine motor wise, where is your child at this point in time, and where should they be? And what are things you're doing? So we do a lot of problem solving initially with families in initial consultations. And if your child doesn't need OT, we tell you that. We're not like, self-serving here, like, oh, everybody needs OT. Like, no, could everybody benefit from OT? Yes, absolutely. I mean, I still do a lot of things regulation wise as an adult that is OT specific and related and sensory movement related. However, that initial referral, it doesn't hurt to just ask a question, and we can problem solve it together. I always like to include the pediatrician because I think that's just best practice, for sure. And sometimes pediatricians think like, oh, they're fine, I've seen this before, or wait and see, like Cindy was saying. And so, but if we can tap into these things at an earlier age, it just helps form that brain body connection that much sooner. Those neural pathways get formed sooner, and the sooner we use form them, the sooner we can use them, right? And it's use them or lose them. And so once they're there, they're formed. And that's what we help, with these older age kids, is really forming those new neural pathways of how you're processing movement from your own body in space. And once they're formed, then it's great. But the younger we can start, the better.
Right, thank you. And the last question I see is, if they are looking for an occupational therapist, how do they find one? Because you are based in San Francisco, so it may not work for somebody who is based in New York. So is there an association where they can find information, or is it through your insurance? Or is there any forum or website that they can go to?
That's a good question. I mean, in San Francisco, we know that there are certain clinics. I think that is a good question to ask the pediatrician, actually. If they know of any occupational therapists. You can also ask the insurance companies. But services, in San Francisco are very different than services in other states. So there's like a national board certification for occupational therapists. And you can go to that website and you might be able to see nationally certified, but each state has also their own licensure. And so how it works per state is different. So sometimes, like I just know in California, because that's where we are, but like from 0 to 3, there's free PT/OT speech services from 0 to 3 through Golden Gate Regional Center. And they will come into homes and do those assessments for you if you have any questions at that early age, and you don't have a diagnosis. If you have some sort of diagnosis at an early age, though, then you definitely will qualify for services right away and get those going. And people will, the pediatrician will start that process with you guys and contact.
But they also have their own set of criteria in which of what will qualify. So there's definitely different organizations, and maybe at some point we can put a list together and we can attach it to the seminar if that is helpful for families. But definitely if they're in the San Francisco Bay Area, they can shoot us a call or shoot us an email, and we'll be happy to do our best to direct them if depending on what their needs are.
Great, thank you. Well, this was really helpful. I don't see any other questions. So thank you so much for your time. And we are looking forward to your next sessions. Thank you, Cindy, and thank you, Maya.
Thank you.
Thank you.